How's it going? This is the first episode of the Start podcast. I am your host, Brady Silverwood. Before we get started today, I just wanted to say there are so many podcasts out there, and the fact that you're listening to my podcast right now means a whole lot to me. So, the purpose of this thing is I hope you can listen to it and gain courage to really just go for it in your life and hopefully follow your dreams and whatever it is that you want to do in your life. So, for the first podcast today, when I was thinking of who I should have on as a guest, I thought of why not having one of the most inspiring people in my life come on and talk with me. So for today's episode, I'm actually interviewing my dad, Jim Silverwood. He is the CEO and president of Affirmed Housing Group out here in San Diego, California. His company has financed over $1.4 million in the housing industry. Thanks to him, he's supported over 53 communities. I think it's over 4,103 units that he's been able to produce. He's been doing this company for over 27 years now. He has 22 employees right now. And I've looked up to him ever since I was a little kid. And it just means a lot to have him here tonight. I'm at his house right now, actually, and because most of the podcasts will be filmed at my house, and you'll be able to tell the difference. But anyways, Jim, thank you for coming on to the podcast, and thanks for being here.
Well, thank you, Brady. I'm honored to be here on your very first podcast, and again, I'm excited for our interview today. Honored to be here and really proud of your achievements and what you've accomplished so far in just 24 years of your life. One point of clarification for you, when you cited the financing statistics, it's actually $1.4 billion in total financing secured. So just wanted to clarify that for your listeners out there.
Good catch. So he's a big boss. He's a big baller. 1.4 billion. All right, we got that right now. Cool, Dad. Yeah, so it's just amazing, like you just said, how old I am, 24 years old, and to think that you've been running a company for 27 years. It's my whole life and more. So it just really puts in perspective. I ran a company for 2 years, and I felt like that was an eternity. So again, you're so accomplished, and I hope that the listeners and viewers today can listen to your message and hopefully find a way to relate with you and get that perspective of hey, I can maybe do this too. So let's give them some background. Where were you born? Where did you grow up? Kind of what was childhood like for you?
So I was born in Cincinnati, Ohio. I don't remember any of Ohio because our family moved when I was only 4 years old to outside of Philadelphia in Pennsylvania. And I grew up there. That's really where I remember my childhood, was growing up in that area, and had a great childhood. We had a very stable family, so I think that helped create that kind of that bond. And I think that we'll probably want to talk about family later, but I think that's carried through to our family now and to you and your siblings. So had a good childhood, didn't really have any traumatic things that occurred in our family. And so I had a good time. In my youth, I was an avid reader. I was an excellent student in school. And I participated in a lot of athletic sports. So I did everything from swimming to basketball, football, baseball, ice hockey, and golf. So I tried my hand at all those and was not a star in any of them, but was pretty competent in all of them.
That's cool. I mean, just hearing you talk about that is so interesting because in school, I was kind of just average. I wouldn't say I was an excellent student. So I don't know where those jeans kind of fell off, but what like I guess like what jobs did you have? Did you have any jobs in high school, and if so, what were you doing?
Sure. So I did the typical kind of jobs that teenagers have in high school. I remember I worked in a car wash close to our home, and that was pretty interesting because a lot of the guys who worked at the car wash were uh, kind of some pretty seedy characters. I remember sometimes they would be drunk while they were working in the car wash,
Oh
so
man,
they would have drinks in the morning, like at 8, 9 in the morning, and so that was pretty interesting.
how old
Uh,
were you
I was
doing that?
probably about 16 then,
Oh wow,
and I worked as a dishwasher. I think probably a lot of your listeners have worked in restaurants, so I was a dishwasher in a few different times. Was a server for a short period of time, and then did some odd jobs too, like just did some work painting, uh, just helping on a painting crew. Um, I did some work, actually, maybe a little bit interesting, is I used to caddy in golf for my father and his friends, but that was back when I was like 12, 13 years old. So in my
oh
really early years, they would drag me out there on a Saturday, and my entire pay was like a hot dog and a Coke. So it was really kind of like we should have had child labor laws back then because
yeah.
they would have been violating them.
That's good. It weren't I remember you telling me one time that you were like a bellman too, right?
Oh yeah, that was one of the other jobs that I had. Yeah, I worked at a Sheraton in Valley Forge, Pennsylvania, and I remember that was kind of eye opening because my hours sometimes I might have a shift from like, well, typically my shifts would be after school, so maybe from like 4 to 10 or 4 to midnight, and you for your listeners who have worked in the hotel and lodging industry, you also see some pretty crazy stuff working in a place like that. There's a pretty uh, going discotheque in the lobby of this hotel, so
Yeah.
you'd see some pretty interesting things there.
Wow. That's cool. Yeah. So it seems like you really had a lot of different experiences and kind of jobs in different industries. In high school, I really just, I was like a grocer at Albertsons and I guess worked a little construction for your company, but I didn't really have as many jobs as you, it sounds like. Um, so I guess like, do you remember? This might be hard to remember, but when you were in high school, did you ever think about, you know, when I'm maybe in my 20s, what am I going to be doing? Or did you ever, I guess, have a thought of, I'm going to be really successful when I'm older? Or did you maybe not think that you were going to be successful? Or did you even think about that?
So I didn't really. It's interesting. A good question. I'd say in high school, I really didn't have many goals. I oh yes, I forgot probably my most interesting job when I was in high school was I was a roadie for a band. So I had these guys who had formed this band. They were much older than me, and the band really took off. Their name was Fat Apple, and they were out again outside of Philadelphia. They would play at weddings, a lot of weddings, and then they would play at nightclubs at night on the Friday and Saturday nights. And I remember this was probably when I was about 18, so maybe like right after, just at the edge of high school, 17, 18. And the only way I would get in the club because they served alcohol was because I was with the band. So I did that for maybe 2 years in my after hours, a lot on the weekends, and a lot sometimes night gigs too. And that was where I grew an affection and love for the music industry and just for music, not really for the industry per se. But I did work my way up. After I was a roadie, then they let me start doing the soundboard for the shows. So I became pretty proficient at being able to balance the sound just right. And of course, after the show, the kind of part that isn't very sexy is you got to take all the equipment down, load it in the vans, and then haul it away, and everyone else is gone basically. So
Yeah. You're the last one there.
yeah. So I think it was Neil Young or somebody did a great song about that, about the roadies still working there. So anyway, so getting back to what my goals were in high school, I really don't feel like I had many goals in high school. I didn't really have aspirations for being a successful businessman until quite a bit later.
You were just probably, well, this is assuming, but this is what I was into in high school, was just like sports and girls, pretty much.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I had music, sports, and girls. Yeah.
Okay.
There you
Yeah,
go.
add in music too. That's awesome. So I'll kind of get into the story a little of what you did, and then you can kind of pitch in. You know it better than me. So, anyways, when my dad was about 18 years old, he got in his van and he was in the driveway of his house, and his mom was out front, and he had all his stuff packed up in Philadelphia, and he set out to drive all the way to the West Coast, California, by himself. And if I can remember, wasn't your mom pretty emotional when you did that?
Yeah, my mom and I think it was one of the first times I'd ever seen my dad cry. My dad was not he didn't show affection or emotion rather, not affection. But I think that at least in my life and my interaction with him, I think that was maybe it had to be one of the first times I saw him cry.
And how much money in your pocket?
So I remember I had a Ford Econoline van. Your listeners, unless they're older, are not going to even know what that was. But
And what do you drive now? What do you drive now? Just for
a Tesla Model S.
Okay.
So a Ford Econoline van, and it had a stereo system built in. Back then, we used to listen to these things called 8-tracks.
Okay.
And it was before cassettes, which were before DVDs, which were before MP3s, which are before everything you use now. So anyway, I had $400 to my name. I had saved up, had $400. I had my stereo, had a wetsuit and surfboard because I used to surf in the New Jersey shore, and my clothes, and that was about it.
So what was like the plan? Just hit the beach and then see what happens?
Well, I had a friend who went to my local high school, and he already lived out here in San Diego. So I knew that he had told me, we had talked on the phone, and he had said to me that I could just stay at the house he was staying at for a while. Little did I know that when I got here to San Diego, that it was a very awkward situation because he was in a place with a young family, and they had little kids, and we were totally cramped in, and he and I would just sleep on the couches.
Oh,
So we
man.
didn't even have a bedroom.
Wow. So it's totally not what you're expecting. And then so the first few months of being in San Diego, you're just the way I've heard it is you're just kind of a surfer bum. You weren't working too much, and kind of started to run out of money, and then you found out what your brother was doing. Do you want to talk a little about that?
Yeah, so you're exactly right. Me and my buddies would just do odd jobs to make enough money. Well, I left that situation at that other home, and we did rent an apartment. Me and this other young guy named Mike, and we rented an apartment, and so we needed money to pay our rent and for food, basic necessities. So I did odd jobs here and there. I did some like landscaping work. I did some kind of laboring for some construction crews, and just some odd jobs here and there. And mostly it was just enough to get by, totally just to get by, like made enough money to pay the rent and some bills, and then we would surf, and we'd go to Mexico a lot. So back in those days, Mexico was not nearly
Like
as
TJ?
dangerous.
Would you go to TJ?
We would go past TJ, so we would go down to these surf spots down along the coast,
Oh, okay.
past Tijuana. So mostly down closer from Rosarito Beach down to Ensenada, and there's several really renowned surf spots, and we would go down there because there was no crowds out in the water, and the waves were really great, and you could buy tacos. You literally could get a taco and like a Corona for like 25 cents or something. It was
Wow,
ridiculous. Or
that's
maybe the
nuts.
taco was 25 cents and the Corona was 25, so it's 50 cents. So with $1, you could have two tacos and two beers. So those were some very carefree days of my life. I have fond memories about them, and
Before the
and
children.
yeah, yeah.
Just
Well,
saying.
before I met your mom and
Before
fell in
me.
love
No.
with her,
Yeah.
and there was a lot of girls too.
Okay.
I'm just
Good
saying.
to know. I won't share this with mom.
No,
No.
she knows you can.
Yeah. That's awesome. So once you kind of started, I guess, making money and doing some construction, uh, as I know, you kind of worked your way up. You were doing all the different jobs, and you're able to see kind of everything that went into a job site, and from the ground up how every piece was kind of crucial to it.
Yeah. So I'll tell you. You had asked earlier about my motivations and when did I start to get motivated. So it was in my very first like official construction job. There's a town here in San Diego, a city called Escondido. I mean, it's like 150,000 people, so it's a city. But we worked. I got hired on a crew. I had to show up like several times to get hired on this crew, and they were building apartments in Escondido, California. And so in the beginning, I was just a laborer. So I worked for the framing crew, which is the carpentry crew that builds the building. And so I would carry studs all day and other lumber. And I remember it was this like, I loved it though because I was in good shape and I could carry a lot of lumber, and you just carried lumber all day long. I mean, it's crazy how fit you could get. But also at that time, pretty quickly recognize that that's not what you want to do the rest of your life because that would just ruin your body. So I learned pretty quickly that the difference in pay between myself as a laborer, whatever my pay rate was, and between the carpenters, the guys who had bags on and the carpenter bags, and they were building walls and floors and roofs and everything else, they earned like double what I earned. So it was pretty quick that I started to get motivated because I said, wow, if I could become a carpenter, my paycheck will double. And so that was a big motivator for me. And it was also like a challenge. I viewed it as a challenge. Like, could I, learn that trade? And so I did. And I learned it pretty quickly. I was just very persistent with the foreman on the crew that he should let me try it. And I did. And I worked my way up from being just a laborer to a carpenter. And then within like a year or two, I was a foreman on a crew. I would advance to like a senior carpenter, a foreman on a crew. And then later after that became what's called a superintendent, where you run an entire job.
Gotcha. So I think me and you too have talked about this before. Um, wasn't there an experience where maybe you saw a superintendent, you saw like the nice car he had, and then like you saw the way he ran his site, and it was the first experience where you saw someone else who was very successful, and you said to yourself, like, why can't I do that?
Yeah, exactly. So it was actually the owner of the apartment project, the owner, and I remember speaking to him, and I saw him. He was very frugal, and I saw him. This was a fairly big project, probably 50 or 60 apartments, and I would see him walking around picking up scraps of lumber and like taking nails out of them with his hammer, and then giving the guys the scraps of wood to use in the building. And I thought to myself, what a waste of that guy's time and resources to be doing that menial labor like that when he could be doing something much more important. And I had a chance over lunch one day, we would just eat at the job site, to speak to him. And I remember coming away saying, this guy is not very learned, right? And I felt like I was smarter than him. And I said to myself, if this guy can do this apartment project like that, I can do something similar. I was pretty sure of it. So that was a real motivation for me.
Yeah. That's so cool. Um, so I guess in the experience of your company, you've been doing it for 27 years. Someone who's listening to this, maybe, that wants to plan everything out, and maybe they're into housing, maybe they're not into housing, maybe it's into music or food or whatever it might be, and they're trying to, I guess, like, get into it. In your 27 years, is there some type of like advice you would give them, or maybe something you've noticed in all the years that has stayed consistent in your business, no matter how good or bad you're doing? It's something that you always kind of are learning, and it keeps coming up.
So that's a good question. I think there's several different variables and different things that make successful people successful. So certainly, hard work and desire and drive, those, you have to have those. I think for myself as an entrepreneur, I think you also have to be willing to take risks. So if you're not a risk taker, you should just go work for someone else, work for a company. You're comfortable, you put in your hours, you go home. If you're an entrepreneur and you really want to, do it yourself and create a company, and you need to be willing to take risks. And that can be scary because sometimes it involves putting your financial resources on the line. I've had ups and downs in my development career. In the early 1990s, we had this big financial transition in our country where all the savings and loans, there used to be two different kinds of financial institutions in our country. There was savings and loans, and there was commercial banks. And all the savings and loans got wiped out in 1990, 91, 92. And so it was a real shockwave in the financial industries, and in the development business, it was very impactful. So I barely survived. I came very close to having to file bankruptcy. I didn't, but it basically wiped me out at that point. So I had to start over, and that's really when I got into the apartment development business that I've been in for the last 26, 27 years. Prior to that, our company built single-family homes for sale. And so it was a very lucrative business, but that taught me some real hard lessons. And sometimes it's things that are totally out of your control. So that had to do with these financial institutions. It had nothing to do with me or my company. And it was something that was just out of our control. And so, but again, I'm trying to get back to that whole thing about risk taking. You have to be willing to take some risks to be a successful entrepreneur.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think if someone's listening to this right now, and I think they're listening to it for that reason. They must have some type of an itch, like I've had in the past, where I've had that you just start to wonder, is like you did when you were doing the lumber, like, am I going to be doing this forever? I don't want to be doing this forever. So I think once you take that risk, you almost have to accept, I'd rather be doing this and fail at this than keep doing what I'm not into and be successful at that. Because I think a lot of us can be successful at something we don't like, but it's like, you kind of have to weigh your mental health as well, and like your well-being through that. So that's very interesting. Okay, this is kind of just an overall like life question. What's been, and it's hard to probably pinpoint, but maybe just one experience or memory in your life that stands out as kind of just if you had to describe to someone your kind of best moment of your life, what would that be?
So I would say I had two. I'd say that one of the moments was meeting your mother, my wife, and
Oh, this
and
is the
the
Nicholas Sparks notebook right here.
yeah, yeah, and the other was the birth of all my four children.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
That's
definitely.
really nice.
Those are standout moments in my life.
So our sound guy behind the scenes doing all the amazing sounds for this podcast, Marty, he was telling me beforehand, he was like, you should ask your dad if you were a mistake. That's that's one of the questions he wanted me to ask you. So that clears it
No, you
up.
weren't
I
a
was not a
mistake.
mistake. I was actually one of the best moments of my dad's life. Okay, cool. All right, now I mean, I could be wrong, but I think I know what your answer might be for this one. What's been the most maybe challenging thing that's happened in your life that you've had to overcome?
So, yeah, you could guess what this one was. So, my daughter, Caitlin, when a few days before she was 16, she was diagnosed with a brain tumor, and she had been totally healthy all her life, and it was just like a lightning bolt. It hit our family, hit Caitlin, your mom, and myself, and all of you too, out of the blue, just like wham. And so she had to have surgery. It turned out to be cancerous, and she had to go through physical rehabilitation, radiation treatment, and chemotherapy over like 18-month period. It was just crazy, and so that turned my world upside down. Luckily, I had good, solid employees at my work that could keep my work going while your mother and I dealt with that and trying to get Caitlin better. And the good news is she's a survivor. She has been in remission for years and years now. And but that definitely, when you face a challenge like that in your life, it definitely, for me personally, I don't know about other people, like where you turn to, but I know for me, it made me feel closer to God that the Lord stepped in and saved my daughter. And if I didn't have that to lean on, I don't know what I would have done. You have friends and family to lean on, but that was certainly something that was really important for your mom and I to have
Yeah.
our faith.
Yeah, it was definitely a hard time. I was pretty young when, our family went through this, but um what I always say to people is that I think our family is so much stronger after going through something like that and being able to get out onto the other side. I think we're so much closer than maybe we ever would have been. And I noticed you said something that's interesting because you were talking about it earlier in your business is just it being out of your control. I think sometimes that's really hard for us to understand is when maybe it's something we didn't even do, but then we have to deal with the consequences.
Yeah, and one thing I'm sure all your listeners could attest to this is that everybody that I've met, everybody has challenges in your life, and some people call it like crosses to bear, and so sometimes it's in personal relationships, sometimes it has to do with like drinking or drugs, something like that. Sometimes mental illness or financial. A lot of people have financial issues, but everybody has challenges in their life. And if someone says they've just like you see them and you think they're just skating through life and they've never had any issues, believe me, they will at some point, because everybody has major challenges in your life.
Yeah, it's kind of like if someone acts like they don't, like be cautious,
Yeah,
be a little weary of, if you can trust them. Like,
yeah,
are you human or are you alien or where are you from? Um, okay, this is an interesting question. So you can say no if you haven't, or yes if you have. Has there been any moments in your life where you wish you did something and for some reason you just didn't do it or you're scared to do it? Any regrets you could think of?
I really can't. I don't have any major regrets. But if I had to you know, think of one thing, I would say that when I was a little kid, I wanted to be an astronaut. So that would have been pretty cool to be an astronaut. I've
Oh
always had a
wow.
love of aviation. I still to this day, I love, flying. I have my pilot's license, although I haven't used it in more than 20 years. But I love aviation. One day I was super fortunate enough to be chosen for this program with the U.S. Navy.
Wasn't that like your one of your birthdays, right? Or
No, it wasn't. No, that was a different situation with the MiG airplane. I
oh
flew in a
yeah,
MiG.
yeah.
Yeah, that was crazy. I flew in a Russian MiG airplane, and with a pilot from Ukraine, a Ukrainian pilot, and we did flips. We did circles. We did, things where you'd have like 4 or 5 Gs on your body. It was exhausting. I had my ears were not normal for maybe 2 weeks after that. I
Wow.
felt, and my balance was off. It was just crazy what you go through. But I was going to say I was fortunate enough through some acquaintances to get invited to a VIP program that the U.S. Navy has, and so I flew out in a plane from San Diego to the USS Stennis aircraft carrier, about 100 miles off the coast here in San Diego, and landed on the deck of the aircraft carrier. Got a patch later called a tailhook patch
Uh,
for having done that, and we spent the weekend on the ship and met a lot of the crew, all the way from the most junior folks to the officers and the flyboys and the commander of the carrier, and it was super impressive. I'll never forget that. It made me feel very confident in the ability of uh, our fighting forces, and especially the U.S. Navy and those guys who run the aircraft carriers.
wow, that's awesome. Yeah, and your dad was kind of into that as well, right? So maybe you kind of got that from him, or
Yeah, I think that the how I mentioned about being an astronaut or something was definitely through him. He worked for a company, General Electric. A lot of people have heard of General Electric, but he worked in there. They used to have a space division, and he worked in jet engines for the U.S. military, for GE, for the U.S. military, and he met a lot of really interesting test pilots and things like that. And then he worked in his in the spaceflight division, and he worked. His big project was a space mission called Voyager, which ended up being the longest lasting U.S. spacecraft. It actually went out of our solar system and was still alive, and
wow.
it was a very basic uh, system. Like I think I once read that, like the Apple phone you have now had more computing power in it than the Voyager, by far, not even close.
Wow.
So you could see it's like basically like a primitive device, but
And it's going out of the solar system. You'd
yeah.
think it would
So
need a lot more
yeah. So who knows? Maybe
technology power.
maybe someone from somewhere far, far away one day will retrieve it and
Wow.
come visit us.
That'd be cool. Yeah, the only reason, so that's first off, that's good that you don't have a lot of regrets. I think you pass that on to me. One of my I wouldn't say it's like a fear necessarily, but whenever I think of decisions like should I do this or should I not, it's there's something in me that I need to see it through even if it doesn't work out. Um, and life is short. So if you're listening to this and you regret not asking that girl out or that boy out or applying for that job that you don't know if you're good enough for, just go for it. Like, this moment is all we have right now, and um, you know, I think failure isn't really failing. I think it's just learning. So if you're able to look at it that way, hopefully you could live your life without that many regrets, I guess. So the way I like to I know this is the first podcast, but the way I plan on ending the podcast is talking about something that we're grateful for in our life right now, because in my experiences of my life, gratitude has really given me courage and perspective to just really try to live my life to the fullest. And I think it's a powerful tool for anyone listening. So, is there anything you're really grateful for right now, Dad?
So I'm grateful for my family, for my friends. I'm grateful for the employees at my company. We treat our company like a family. When you think about it, I know we were talking a little about business here. And when you think about it, most people that go into an office, whether it's in the real estate development business or any other kind of business, you're there, as much as you're at your home. So it's really important for me that we treat uh, the folks that work at our company like family, and so that's important to me. Family, friends, my faith, um, and I think that's pretty much it.
That's good.
And a good golf game.
Oh, okay. My dad loves golf, so
Yeah.
uh, that's cool. Yeah, I mean, um, I'm grateful for all those things as well. Not too into golf, but um, in addition, I'm just grateful uh, that I've had a father and family that are supportive of the things I want to do in my life. You guys have never gotten in the way, I guess, of my kind of vision of where I would like to live and where I'd like to work and how I'd like to live my life. So I'm hoping one day I can have a family and pass that on to my kids. And then also to live in a country like the US where, I can wake up and decide, hey, I want to start a podcast to inspire other people to create and go for their dreams. And that in a week's time, after getting equipment and finding a location and finding my friend Martine Vicario, Marty Vix, to help out with the sound and everything. If you heard the intro today for today's podcast, that's all Marty Vix. Go DM him if you want a little sound bite for your podcast. But it's beautiful that our country, our government, allows people like me to go do these things. Um, I think about it sometimes. If I was living somewhere where it was like I legally had to work at a certain place and I couldn't work anywhere else, or I had to, there's so many instances where people's rights to freedom are taken away, and I'm just grateful to have the right to explore my ideas and, I guess, my inner passion. So that's my grateful thing today.
Well said, Brady. Well said.
um, so yeah, that's pretty much all we got for today's episode. Um, Again, I hope you listening out there can resonate with my dad's story. I definitely have, and that's why I wanted to share it with you guys, because um, anyone who just maybe would see my dad on TV or in San Diego, what was the award that you guys just got awarded in Vegas? It was
The National Association of Home Builders
so in
annual
all the
award.
United States, they just got this award for one of the best affordable housing companies. So again, when you would just see that and see my dad, maybe you would think, this guy, man, he's thought he was going to be successful from the start. He's just you are one of a kind. But just thinking that you're not human, that's what I want to focus on in this podcast: humanize successful people, because we're all human. We all go through challenges, and none of us knows it all. And if you have that urge in you, I hope you just go for it. So I think this podcast is going to help a lot of people, Dad. So thank you for coming on, and thank you all
Well,
for listening.
well, I'm really honored to be on for your first podcast, Brady, and on behalf of your brothers and sisters and your mom, we're very proud of you.
That means a lot. I love you, Dad.
Love you too, bud.